Cat's Cradle here. This is a how-to video on how to can carrots. Nothing could be simpler. I always start any canning project by washing my jars thoroughly using soap and hot water and making sure by inspecting them very carefully that there's no little bits of food or rust or anything on the jars. They must be perfectly clean. I rinse them thoroughly and then I put them in a warm oven. Now, I don't believe in bringing my jars up to 250, 350 degrees or anything like that. I am just trying to keep them warm. So I put my oven on its lowest setting of 170 degrees and just use it as a holding spot for the jars until I'm ready to use them. I do not want to be putting any hot liquid or hot food into a cold jar, so I just keep them warm. You don't want to put cold food or cold liquid into a hot jar because you run the risk of cracking your jar. So it's best to keep them warm before you add warm product to them. I was given two large mesh bags of carrots, misfit carrots, those that the farmer couldn't sell commercially. And they're not very pretty. And you'll see this one is huge, and there are some that kind of look like twins where two carrots tried to grow off one seed, and they're pretty ugly. But I knew that I wanted to use them and not let them go to waste, so I decided to can them. This is one of my favorite pieces of equipment. This is a Farberware peeler. It's wonderful. It sells for about $2.97. I recommend that you get several of them and have, in case one were to break or you know, you were to lose it or something like that, because these are great little peelers. So I just peeled all the carrots and got them collected in one bowl, and you can see how different in size they are. So this could be a little problematic, but I kind of even the score here by trying to cut the carrots in such a way that each piece is about the same density. So you can see them here in the bowl all gathered together, and they look very similar now, not as dissimilar as they looked in the bowl before they were cut up. The rabbits and composting worms will be very happy to get the peels. Nothing goes to waste here. I don't ever simmer my lids and bands anymore. I just don't feel like I need to. I have a boiling water kettle, so I put my lids and bands in a metal bowl and pour the boiling water over them, and that's sufficient enough to soften the rubber for the canning process. You want them to be soft so that when you screw the rings on, you put the lids on and you screw the rings onto the jar, that rubber is soft and pliable and forms to that jar. That's the reason for heating them up. After you've put all your lids and rings on your jars and your jars are in the canner, if you find that you're a little short of water in your canner, you can always use the water that the lids and the rings soaked in to fill your canner. It really helps because this water's already hot and it doesn't take as long as if you used water out of the faucet that you had to bring back to a boil. So just remember that you can use this water if you need to add more water to your canner as well. I then put my canning salt in. I don't use regular table salt. I use canning salt. And for pints, I use a half teaspoon, and for quarts, I use a whole teaspoon. Today I'm just using pints, so it's a half teaspoon. Then I load my carrots into the jar, and it's kind of like a puzzle getting them in there because I don't want a lot of gaps and spaces. I want to stack them as tightly as I can and get as much product in there as I can. And when I'm satisfied that the carrots are stacked just like I want them, then I go ahead and use my boiling water kettle. I put purified water in there and I bring it to a boil, and then I pour it into my jars. I only take a few jars out of my oven at a time in order to load the carrots into them, because I want the jars to stay pretty warm for the time when I pour the boiling water in. Now the carrots are packed so densely that I can't run a little plastic knife or a little skewer or anything down there in order to release the air bubbles. So what I do is I have a towel on my counter, and I just gently hit the jars on that towel to cause the air bubbles to come to the surface and escape the jar. You want to do this because you don't want to trap air bubbles in there when you're canning, because they are likely to cause the seal to weaken as they come to the surface and try to escape. So you want to get as much air out of there as you can. I then put the hot lids and rings on. I screw my lids on until they're firmly on. I don't crank them down to get them as tight as I possibly can, just until they're nice and firmly on. Then I use a jar lifter to put the jars into my pressure canner that already is hot and has the right amount of water in it. Remember, carrots are a low acid food. They must be canned in a pressure canner. You cannot process them in a boiling water bath. Before I put the lid on my canner, I make sure that the air vent is clear. You do this by holding it up to a light and looking through it, making sure that it's clear. If you can't see through it, you need to run a skewer through it or a pipe cleaner to clean it out, because you need the air in the canner to vent efficiently. That absolutely cannot be clogged. So I put my gasket in my lid and then put my lid on my canner, adjusting it so that the arrows line up and the lid is on perfectly. And then I wait for steam to come out of the vent. And steam needs to be pouring out of that vent for about 10 minutes before you actually put your weight on and start the timing process. So after it's vented for 10 minutes, then I put my weight on and I wait for my gauge to come up to 10 pounds of pressure. You can see I'm just slightly over here. It's very, very difficult to get that pressure exactly right when you're cooking on an electric range, especially a ceramic top like I use. So if I stay between 10 and 11 pounds, I'm pretty happy here. Once I'm up to 10 pounds of pressure, that's when I begin timing. And for pints, carrots must process for 30 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure. So I set my timer. If at any point during that 30 minutes the pressure drops below 10 pounds of pressure, I start the timing all over. I raise the temperature slightly to bring the gauge to 10 pounds, and then I begin timing again until I have held that food at 10 pounds of pressure for 30 minutes. When 30 minutes has passed, I turn my stove top off and I wait for the needle on the gauge to return to 0. Once it is down to 0, there also is a little pressure vent on the top of my canner. That will also drop down and become flat with the lid. Once that happens, I know that all the steam has escaped. I still use a pot holder to carefully remove the weight, and at this point there really should be no steam coming out of the vent. I then use 2 pot holders to very carefully open the lid. I twist the lid counterclockwise, which is how it works on my canner, and I offset that lid just slightly to let the massive amount of steam that has built up in that canner escape. To try to remove the lid immediately is perilous in my opinion, because I have been burned several times by trying to do that. So I just slightly set the lid askew to let that steam escape. And when that big rush of steam has come out, then still using the pot holders, I grab the lid by both the handles that are on either side, tilt that lid away from my face, and then remove it to a safe place, usually to a towel on my counter. And then using the jar lifter, I carefully remove the jars from the canner and put them on the counter that has been lined with a towel. You do not want to put your jars directly on a cold counter. Again, you run the risk of cracking your jar. This is how my jars look as they come directly out of the canner. I've taken the rings off a couple of these. This is actually the day after. You don't want to do that for about 24 hours or until you're sure that your jars are absolutely cold and have cooled down from the canning process. My jars, the outsides look a little cloudy because we have hard water. I can prevent that cloudiness by adding a couple of tablespoons of white distilled vinegar to my canner, and it will keep the jars from being cloudy, but I forgot that. But it's no big deal. After the jars have completely cooled, usually the next day after I've canned them, I remove the rings, and then I wash the outsides of the jars and the tops with hot soapy water and rinse them off. And then this is what they look like. After washing them, you are able to, or in the washing process, you're able to remove all of the minerals that have built up on the outside. And this is how they look. So the rings are gone. I remove those so that no rust builds up under them, because it makes it makes it hard to get off the rings if they become rusty. And then I label them and I put them on my shelf. Now, I don't think these canned carrots are delicious. Personally, I don't really care to just eat canned carrots. I like to eat carrots that are slightly firm. I don't like to cook my vegetables to death, but cooking in the pressure canner, it's very, very difficult not to end up with soft vegetables. I do cut these in larger chunks, which helps a little bit. These carrots are excellent added to soups or stews. I would not want to put them in initially when I was making the soup or stew and have them cook all day, because they would become invisible. They would just absolutely cook to mush. Because they're already cooked, they're soft. But if you wanted to add them at the end of the cooking process, that would be just perfect. So if you end up with some extra carrots that you don't know what to do with, go ahead and can them up. They're beautiful. They make a nice addition to your pantry, and they're another fast food, something that can be added to stretch out an Irish stew or a pot of vegetable soup. They're wonderful to have. If you have any questions, just leave them for me in the comments below. And until next time, this is Cat's Cradle.